They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking,
hi, this is Nico. You're listening to my dad Fall, also known as the White Rabbit, and James Jardine on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Buckle up and enjoy.
deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
Alrighty, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back down the rabbit hole for episode 3 of the this podcast series I've got with Bo here. We're going to talk through the last and final segment. You've done the work, right? By now, presumably, or at least you've listened to how to do the work. You've got all your metrics and you're collecting the right stuff. Now it's time to put it all together and start making a case for what you want and how to get it there with some concrete evidence. Reintroduce again, because you guys have known him for 2 episodes now. Bo, welcome back.
Fall, I'm pretty excited. I think this is going to hopefully bring home everything from the previous podcast segments into scope and hopefully show why it's worth doing this.
Yeah, man. All right, here we go. I'm going to. We're not going to delay this. So this third part, we're gonna keep this. We're gonna keep this tight. He's gonna give you guys a ton. I've got some stuff to add as well on top of this. It's really a lot of good content. So here we go. Bo, take it away, buddy.
Thank you. Big thing to start off, there's third part. This one, we're now taking the metrics and the program that we've built and using that to actually translate. We're simplifying security for external parties. So this is where if you want to simplify something, you've always got to understand it at a deep level. Otherwise, you risk oversimplifying or just being flat wrong. So I'm a big believer in risk management approaches. I've studied the NIST, I've studied ISO's way of doing it, I've studied Gartner's way of doing it. And the one that really stood out to me is worth sharing with the ones maybe people aren't aware of is Douglas Hubbard's book, Failure of Risk Management. There's a lot of good points in there, and I just share that because it influenced what I'm about to share with y'all. And
it's a heavy read, but it's a good one, right?
Yeah, it's not the easiest read, but it's definitely got some pokes you in the chest a couple of times, especially some of us who've been doing risk management for 30 years, that it's like, well, that's a really good point. And that's why I'll start off here. I'll just go through one bullet on this one, then I'm gonna actually go through how we do this. And I want to highlight the one things he pointed out and I hadn't thought of before is actually look at your old risk assessments. Now, if you've never done it before, then it doesn't matter. But if you're like, a lot of people actually do an annual risk assessment. Actually look at the old ones and see how accurate they were, and try to get some way to find out if you're actually on point or not. Now, you can't prove a negative. Everybody knows that. You can't say that, hey, we didn't get attacked. It wasn't necessarily because I bought all these new tools. But if you were attacked and you defeated them, then you have really good metrics. Like if you know that you were blocking stuff either on the endpoints or the firewall, or you even pushed out an enemy group out of your network before they could do something. Those are really powerful metrics to know that how good your assessments are. So let's get started. This is, I know, Raph, you're going to laugh, but if you just Google FMEA analysis template Excel, this has been around for 20 some years, easily.
Yeah, man. This is fantastic. Listen, I want to my personal anecdote here. Back in my early days in the Six Sigma world, working for General Electric, this is something that got introduced to us when our team got assigned a black belt to kind of formalize our decision making. Young, inexperienced me hated this for the exact same reason I hated to show my work in math or physics class or anything else. Like sometimes you just knew the answer and you're like, okay, that's the answer. I know what it is. I'm just going to write it down. And teachers were always, no, you got to show your work. And this is show your work. It's awesome. Go ahead.
Talking about doing the math, that's exactly what it's doing. But what I want to highlight a little though, it's not just one person. You need to get consensus from your team, from the IT guys that are actually managing Active Directory. If you're looking at any risk from Active, you need to talk to people, because one thing that this will fall on its face if no one believes you. You know, if everybody's like, if you didn't coordinate it, everyone's like, what are you talking about? Where'd this come from? So don't surprise people. So you start here on just going with the basics, explaining how you do a FIMIA analysis or failure modes, effects analysis. You start with the tasks. Now, I'm not asking anyone to do all of their tasks, because that's insane. Try to do your critical tasks, like configuring tools, monitoring the network, look at the high level, conducting an incident response. Go through the tasks that are involved and break those into basically your concerns. Like when you're monitoring the network, are you going to miss something? If power goes off, are you done? What is it? Network goes down, something is mischaracterized, like someone makes a mistake versus a visibility issue. And you go through all of those, you're looking at the impact. Like if something's missed, what's the impact? Is it, ransomware? Is it, there's gonna be a second, you have an L2 that looks at it. Only the company can answer these questions. Like how many single point failure do you have? And if everything's relying on Billy and Billy's sick, then does that mean no one's monitoring the network today? So those are all risks you need to calculate for. You go through here and look at, okay, that's what it is. Here's what the severity would be. If Billy's not here and no one's monitoring the network, maybe that's bad. So you talk about like we only have one analyst, right? And no one is backfilled to replace him. Then you look at the likelihood that's going to happen. You use real numbers. How many days did Billy miss last year? Or, you use real numbers. What have you seen from events that people have missed? Or how many times has it occurred in the last year where only through personal knowledge have you found like, hey, we're vulnerable to this vulnerability because your tools aren't identifying it, right? Because that'll tell you have gaps. Because it's really hard to know you have a gap if you didn't already have personal knowledge knowing that vulnerability existed, because there's a segment of the network where it's deployed. So that then you look into the likelihood. And then you talk about the last component of this is the likelihood of detection. Like, would you know? Like, this is likely to happen, yes or no? And if it did happen, would you know about it? Obviously, if you have no idea of knowing, then that's really bad. Like the odds are you would know if Billy was sick today. That would be a high probability you would detect that. But the likelihood that you would know that Billy missed something, if that's all the only person looks at is Billy, and no one's checking, to make sure Billy didn't miss something, then that would be high. Same thing with configuration. You can go, I personally had like 5 or 6 lines on here. I think I had 8. Total of different big categories that we went through. And then as you break through them, you start seeing trends and you start getting categories, right? And I just put the numbers here and I'll explain in the next slide what those are. But you actually said, maybe this is ransomware. Maybe this is an issue with one of your products. Maybe this is an issue that deals with your ability to meet SLA. Whatever those are, you start trending those and you start prioritizing them. Like the ones that the score is really high, you probably want to go to the trouble to actually start figuring out what you're going to do about it. Like, for example, if Billy's the only one that can do this, maybe you look for the low-cost thing of having him write down what he does, and you can backfill him. Or, training someone else to backfill him after he writes down what he does, so in case he's sick, it doesn't fall to the floor. Maybe you need a new tool. So then you reach out to vendors, right? And I guarantee there's 4,000 close friends of everyone on this podcast who want to help them with their problems. I put that high confidence. And you will work with the vendors to figure out what are the best tools for y'all at the best cost that gets the risk down. So you'll go through here and you'll get numbers for, let's say the risk is 800 if you don't do anything, but if you can either train someone or write stuff down or buy a new tool, it goes down to 500. Those numbers matter, because when you go to the next section after you've done the mitigations, now you start getting dollar amounts. And this is where I got this from Douglas Hubbard in his book. Anyone can download it. The URL is there in blue on the slide. So if you're just listening to a podcast, please go to YouTube and just grab the URL from here. And what's important is you'll go through here, whatever that is, ransomware, maybe it's nation state actor stealing your intellectual property, and you put in what the probability of loss is. And that's going to be based on either real experience or consensus from multiple people. Don't make this all, Billy said this or Bo said this or Rafal said this. Get consensus, because you might find out that you're grossly underestimating, or you might find you're grossly overestimating. And the best way to deal with that is look at your previous assessments and then do consensus building with the team, because you got to be able to defend this. And then where you get the dollar amounts, that is absolutely from hard numbers is most you can make it, because I have found great success when you actually have hard numbers that people are on the low side. No one's going to argue with you. Like, this sounds pretty bad, 100,000 to 50 million. That's a really wide range. Yeah, that's unfortunate, but depending on how, let's say this is a threat action, if you're calling in an incident response team, like you're paying for your insurance company to do this, you have a pretty good idea what the bare minimum is going to cost just for them to come here and make sure you're good. That's going to always be your low end. And generally, I can tell them what I know from previous experience, what that could be. And then no one argues with me, because they're like, oh yeah, because I always put a lower number than what experience says, so they can't say that's too high. And then where you get the bigger number, you get hard data from your company. Like, if our IP was stolen and we lost, this contract, how much would it cost our company? Or, things of that nature. And then you're like, you go low again, so that no one can say, you're just trying to use fear, uncertainty, and doubt. No, this is not about FUD. This is about calculating risk in an unemotional manner. So you go through there and you look at, here's what it is without, here's what I'm spending on controls today. Because, I'm hoping everyone on this call has some kind of endpoint detection. And, as you get more mature, you're going to have some kind of security incident and event monitoring management tool. And then as you get more mature, you're actually going to have network detection response. You have data loss prevention. Your security stack gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that decreases the likelihood of risk, right, of it actually happening. But it also, increases the cost of its controls. That's just reality.
So listen, I want to throw, I just want to throw this in, because I can't tell you how many times I personally said, when I've seen something like probability, because we always use, probability times the expected loss and all that stuff. Like, the risk formula is pretty well understood by now, but it's that probability, right? Like that what's the likelihood, and the fact that you can get a consensus answer with real dollars and real math behind it. It creates I'm not going to call it bulletproof, although maybe I will, but it is going to make it very defensible. Right? So you're not standing up there, because there's always that somebody, at least one of those in your audience, Bill. I'm sure you've had this where you're presenting and they're like, well, where did you get that number? You're like, as a matter of fact, let me show you. And you pull this off and you're like, let me show you how we got there. By the way, this isn't my idea. This is consensus from the industry, insurance industry, and people that understand risk management. Any question, then usually you just hear crickets. And that's what you want.
And because I start with internal, but I actually ran this through two external partners. They were actually very helpful in building this. I will say, Jia Zhang from Gartner was a big help on getting this, and I talked to Paul Proctor about about doing this as well. And they were big helpers in making me more mature. So I want to do a shout out to Jia and to Paul. As well as CDW actually helped me as well with going through and just trying to finalize, because like I said, there's people that want to help you buy stuff. They were definitely there as we were going through this, trying to figure out what would be the best optimization, and they actually helped me from an external partner standpoint. And you go through here and you write stuff down. This is not what you're presenting to leadership. I'm not at all advocating that you show them Excel spreadsheets. What I'm saying is you need to write down these numbers, like what are the categories, what's the risk if you don't do anything new, and what's the risk if you buy this tool or implement this process or hire a new individual. And then you got to go to the final part of this, is actually simplifying it. But you can't simplify it unless you've got, you understand your environment, because you understand your key performance indicators. You've been tracking this for a period of time. Honestly, I didn't start doing this till we'd already been doing this for 18 months. That's when I first started doing this, because it took me a while to get confident that I understood the environment well enough. And then when I did this, it went really well, because they're like, what is this based off of? And I went through the whole thing, but it really, I can't overemphasize, this is not shooting from the hip. If you're just pulling numbers out of your gluteus maximus, I do not recommend taking this forward, because it's going to fall apart when you start trying to talk to someone who has other priorities they want to spend on. My boss will tell me, he would actually help me as well. This was the hardest thing for him. And love my boss. What he's saying is figuring out the colors. Where is the risk tolerance of an organization? Because most CISOs don't have that handed to them. This chart is not, this portion of the chart is not given to the people I've talked to in the industry. Very rarely does the board say, here is our risk tolerance. What you have to do as a CISO or the information security guy or the IT guy, if you know, depending on the size of your company, is figure it out, and then you start getting consensus and you go forward. And you use real experience. Like if you had a ransomware event in the last year or two, you're probably less risk tolerant than you were 3 years ago. Yeah, I'm going to throw that out there, right? But
it just happens. It happens.
Well, I'm just saying, dude, when it comes to nation state actors, there's people that have been hacked by nation state actors, and there are people that don't know it. I will just offer that getting this right is something you want to do first. And now you got the numbers. Before you actually start throwing the numbers on there, have a general idea. And people are more risk tolerant than they say they are, because they don't want to spend money. So take that into account. And then also realize that changes, just like when people say, I'm going to buy the riskiest stocks because they have the best return, until they lose their pants. And then they suddenly are a lot less risk tolerant. So that's just good thought process for you to think about as you're trying to get here. These numbers are numbers I use. You figure out the numbers for your company. If you're a much bigger company, maybe these are in the hundreds, I don't know, tens of millions. This is something that I worked out with Gartner that actually gives more confidence to this chart, is showing where you are and how confident that this is actually going to happen. That was something that G and I, over a couple of conversations, had the light turned on, that was actually a useful thing. So then I would throw that on there after the consensus on the team and industry are like, because I'll tell you right now, the odds of you being attacked by a ransomware actor are pretty high. Pretty confident that's a threat to almost anyone in industry. The odds of a nation state going after you, you really need to look at your industry. Because if you're in the defense industry, pretty likely. If you're in some, like water, power, you might be. Maybe you're, in insurance, you're not worried about. Whatever your industry is, you need to look at what the risks are for that. And you have to be able to talk from that perspective. If don't talk about medical risk if you're not a hospital, because your board's going to be confused. So talk about the risk to your industry. Make sure it's grounded in real stories, not hypotheticals.
I like that.
So here are the 7 categories that could break out from you going through your FMEA analysis, right? Maybe you're worried about ransomware. Maybe there's some compliance issue. If you're in the defense industry, everybody's talking about making sure you have FIPS deployed. The Federal Information Protection Systems level of encryption. Maybe you have a product concern with that you need to get the TPM module deployed. I mean, depending on your industry, depending on what you're doing, this works for everything. You can talk about, visibility awareness from your SOX perspective. I don't care what you do, your supply chain matters. Maybe there's a supply chain issue you need to deal with. Maybe it's you don't have visibility into your supply chain or something. You have a resource constraint. For example, the R6 is just like, dude, you're not getting any more people. So the risk is, here's this risk because of this resource constraint. This person, you can't have 2 CISOs, right? You're not going to hire a second CISO. So these are things that you have to look at. Maybe you need a GRC tool or some things where that comes in, what I'm trying to talk about there, because you can't grow. Some people you can't just get a second one of. And then the last is maybe you have some concerns with IoT. So these are just broad categories that FMEA will pull out. Then you plot them. So you put them on here, and then you talk about where it's unmitigated and mitigated. And the way you know that is because you went through did the process and figured out what's yellow, green, and red. If it's in red, I would definitely recommend mitigating it. If it's in yellow, I don't recommend mitigating it. I really don't. I think that's where you can accept risk. In green, I would put it there, like those are things that are really, really important, should be in green. Like maybe you really want to make sure that horse is dead because you just got a ransomware event. So you really need to implement like 17 things. So you're going to do whatever it takes so that it doesn't happen again. So that green is more for the stuff that you have got that you can run over that horse 7 more times, right? That's for green, is because that threat is so big to the company. You need to take it that seriously. So then what you do is, for the ones you need to mitigate, you plot what they look like. And from those plots, you're going to see there's dollar amounts, right? If you just look at the y-axis. So you can actually start calculating how much it would cost, how much you would be avoiding in risk versus how much it's costing for either a new person, paying a consultant to help you document some processes, or paying for a new tool, right? Or a new service. And all of that comes out. But the bottom line to your senior leaders, you better make sure that your investment is at least multiple factors less than the cost avoidance. Personally, I don't take forward stuff that's not a 10-fold increase, just because I'm going to my board and I want to make sure it's there. But you might be able to get away with 5. You might be able to get away with 3. You won't know unless you talk to your leaders and find out what their risk tolerance is. That helps you figure out where that green really is. Because maybe that 3 is not good enough. So then maybe your green needs to go up further in the chart because people are willing to live with that risk, right? So, or that red needs to move more to the right because, that's not it. We're not going to do that. So now you have hard evidence that is in your either risk tolerance or where you're good. And that's how you do that, because it's not hypothetical. You're going to get feedback when they're like, you want how much money? Okay, I guess that means you're going to tolerate the risk. And then you go through and like, well, what are you spending to get all this stuff? Maybe it's new external services. Maybe you're changing a procedure so that users are going to be more accountable for their actions somehow. Or you're buying a tool or hiring a new person. You can go through all these examples and just put that level. I would not make this slide any busier than it is right here. But this is the kind of stuff that will basically answers all the questions. Because it will actually show that maybe tool number 1 is on, hey, that gets rid of risk 1, 3, and 4. So that's a good thing to show your leadership. That's why you're putting it on there. Or like, hey, look how much we can do internally. Then I would just fix it and not even, I wouldn't send this forward until I fix that. Because now I personally don't go to the boss saying, hey, I just can do this myself. So I don't need my boss to pat me on the back and say, yes, go do that. So, I mean, that's just a personal thing. I would lower the risk and just wait and report it after I've actually make sure that the risk is gone. But that's pretty much the whole presentation. Is that in a nutshell? You go through that, you're looking at your old assessments, you make sure your processes, you understand what you do. You then break it into risk categories like I talk about. You look at where the money's worth investing, and you run it by people. And then once you've got a comfort that that you're representing the picture accurately, then you start elevating it. But I ran it through a lot of people. That took me, just for the building this slide was something I did off and on over 4 months, because it was a lot of work. So
hang out on this slide for a second, Bo, because I just like staring at this. You just go, holy cow, there's a lot in here. Let me kind of see what captures my thoughts really fast. So the ability to show, and you say this is not magic up front, right? But it feels like it when you get it done. It feels like you've done some alchemy, because to show that this risk, look at R1, it goes from 75% probability that you're over $4.5 million. That's kind of nasty, right? That's a big deal. And your leadership goes, no. That's bad. Cannot do that. 3 out of 4 chances that I've got to figure out where to come up with, north of $4 million shortly. Not going to do it. What's it going to take to reduce that probability? Now, it's kind of, this is where I think we get to feel your organization a bit, because sometimes they're like, yeah, take that number, take the dollar number down versus take the probability number down, right? So you're on that sliding scale. You want to be able to have up rather. Sorry, I totally screwed that up. You want to have high confidence in your number. So anything to the right of, I think, that 50% line in red, that should be that's a no-go zone. Like if you're putting stuff in there, like reevaluate yourself. But when you're looking at,
completely agree. That's really embarrassing to take that. You're absolutely right. If you're 5% confident in this assessment, it's probably not worth having it.
Yeah, I wouldn't put that up there. But it's a good visual, because it's like the FMEA, right? It's half of this. I think almost half of this, I would say, is for just you, because we have our biases. We have the things that we already know in our heads, like that math problem you can solve in your head. And somebody goes, how does that actually work? Show me. You're like, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And you kind of go, wait, do I though? This is an industry where we've lived off of fear, uncertainty, and doubt for, I can say, the better part of 20 years. And the actually concrete risk-based approach you're taking here is far and away better than what people are doing in their heads or at their best guess. I've seen people when I used to do a ton of strategy assessments, security strategy assessments, and some people would literally come to me and go, all right, well, my security strategy is, and they would go down each of the Gartner categories and go, I'm going to buy a tool in this and that person, a tool in this and this person. Like, that's not a strategy. Like, what's the risk you're trying to mitigate? How much is that risk? Like, and I think it's fair to say, and I think you've articulated that nicely here. This is not something you walk into a role and on day 2, you're like, all right, here's my plan, right? You do this in chunks, escalating chunks over a course of a couple of years. And I think that first year really is a guess and check year, right? Would you agree?
I do. I think the first year is good. I would almost call it a Jedi mind trick. You're going to go in there and you're going to put your experience, but that's why doing the previous assessments is really important. I don't know if I'd go the board my first year if I have no experience, right? If this is all Kentucky windage, or sorry, if it's all guesswork, I might take a year. And you're like, well, that's forever. You'd be surprised how fast time flies, especially for us guys that are a little gray in the tooth. That once you're on the south side of 50, time, it makes sense to do it right. And I would say 12 months is probably a good starting point. Like, start gathering the data. Do not wait. Start gathering the data, start doing your metrics, start figuring out where your holes are and write them down. Don't forget, like, every time you have a tool that you can't find, or a vulnerability you can't find, don't lose sight of that, because that's the thing that helps you figure out what's the visibility tool you need. Is it I'm not trying to go to products, but maybe it's network detection, maybe it's an EDR, NDR, maybe it's something. Figure out what it is that would make your life easier. And I know everybody wants more people. That's the answer everyone has. So you got to look at alternatives, because most organizations are going to look for automation. They're going to look for, frankly, some tools that will save time if the tool's, cheaper than a person and it gets you high fidelity that it does what it needs to. That's my experience. I would say don't be discouraged if it takes you a while, because you're going to have so much credibility when you take it forward. Because they're going to be like, where did you get this $5 million? I'm glad you asked. And you're going to watch the people's eyes just start, to go back and go, okay, you win. And I have on good authority, it doesn't become adversarial, but you do find out that people start taking you seriously. Right. And but don't That's do awesome. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. If you go with fear, uncertainty, and doubt, you're going to lose credibility, because you need to show.
No, you're 100% correct. Folks, I hope that you follow along and you've got some of this. This is one of those. I put it in 3 parts because I think it's worth learning it in that manner, because you have to have the setup base, because you don't get to this third part by jumping in. You got to know what to collect, then collect it and analyze it, and then start to make sense of this. This episode, this chunk, is how to make sense of it to your advantage. And I think, look, defensible, I'll use that word again, defensible security programs are something that we just need to get used to hearing around in this industry. We'd all want more tools. We'd all want more people. We'd all want this and that. Because our wish list never gets smaller. Trust me, I've been to the RSA conference enough times to know no vendor has ever said, you know what, you should buy less. They all want you to buy more. Everybody does. However, what Mo said that's kind of powerful, I don't know if you caught it, but just a few minutes ago, is that sometimes the answer isn't 4 different pieces of technology. It's one that does enough to move one of those big circles out of that farther right and down to the left. And if that's the case, you start showing this to your vendors are going to start to think this way. And if your vendors start to think this way, I think this moves our industry forward in a, again, defensible manner, because every time there's a breach, every time, somebody gets on the news programs and starts and writes an article, and the talking heads are out there, well, I can't believe they didn't do this, or they didn't protect themselves against this. You're like, listen, here's the framework I use for my security program. This is defensible because everything we've done is moved from here down a little bit into the area where we're like, hey, our board decided this is where we're comfortable. And yeah, sometimes stuff happens and you'll get breached, or you'll have a problem, or maybe you'll just have an incident, doesn't turn into a full-blown breach. But whatever that is, your program needs to be defensible if you're going to be a CISO, if you're already a CISO and you're looking to make sense of this. So let's end it there, because this is a ton of content. Any parting thoughts?
I just hope people really think about this, because this is a way that you can, if you're a publicly traded company, this will help elevate your risk management process for cybersecurity. And if you're anyone in InfoSec, this actually will help you figure out how to eat the elephant. That's what this is all about, right? And this is the end of the elephant, but this is the stuff that will get you decreasing risk in a quantifiable manner, and also making progress over time. Because the last thing I leave everyone with is celebrate the incremental wins. Don't get so big on the final, getting to the end zone, that you forget that, hey, getting a first down is a pretty good deal too.
Yeah. Yes, sir. All right. I want to thank you on behalf of everybody listening who just had some serious aha moments. I know I have. We've taken a little stroll down memory lane with FMEAs and risk analysis. I think I should just go back through my notes and pull out some of my ancient spreadsheets that had some of this stuff. By the way, guys, if you learn nothing else from this, know what you're measuring, know your business, measure risk, do some FMEAs, and then calculate it. Throw it onto a graph like he was showing you in that last slide. And that stuff, it gives you a powerful place to start. You can refine it over time. And I just hope you guys pick something up out of this, because I appreciate the amount of time it's taken for me to put through this. Appreciate Elbit for letting you take and share. Not a lot of companies will let their leadership freely share the methodology and the approach. So big thanks to Elbit Systems of America here and your leadership team for allowing you to get on the program here and put it out to the folks. Guys, reach out to Bo, reach out to me through the LinkedIn page, and we're going to end it there. But I expect you guys to have some comments. I know it's some stuff rattling around in your brain. So for the podcast, this is Raph signing off, saying thank you so